Okay, hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing my March wrap up. And before I start talking about the individual books I read and what I thought of them, I've decided I'm going to go through my Storygraph stats for the month, the Storygraph end of month stats that they give to all of us, just because I think it would be fun. And I actually did this with the very first wrap up video I made for January, and then the video ended up being like 40 minutes long, so I cut it. But I don't think these videos are gonna be getting any shorter. Each one has been about like 40 minutes. Just no matter how quickly I talk, how briefly I talk about each book, I just can't shut up about the books I've read, so they all end up long anyways. So whatever, let's just add this, okay? It's fun and I want to do it. My storage can kill me later. In March 2025, I read, oh, the lighting is gonna get a little dark because it's storming outside, but it still looks fine. I read 23 books in March, and I read 7,285 pages, which is great. I think that might be the highest this year. I think I've been hovering around 2022, so that is a little bit higher. My average rating is a 4.25. That is not true. I reread the All for the Game series, and Storygraph basically saves your rating. And so I read these books in high school, and of course I had to give them all. I was very picky. I don't know why I gave this one a 4.25. Like, girl, just give it a 4 if that's what you think. But I don't star rate my books anymore, and All for the Game is a special one because it has a very close place to my heart, but I don't know if I would say it's a 4.25 star book. But anyways, my average book length was 318 pages, and my average time to finish was 2 days. 100% of the books I read this month were fiction. I've been trying to read at least one nonfiction book a month, but sometimes it just falls by the wayside. I just had a lot of fiction books that I wanted to read this month. The top genre I read from was LGBTQIA, with 12 books read from that genre, and then closely following behind it at 11 books is fantasy, and then contemporary is at 8 books read, and then literary at 6, and historical at 3. And I read 87 books in print from the library usually, and 13% digitally. I do read on my iPad sometimes. And there's my reading calendar. It looks like the only days that I didn't read a single page were the 9th, 10th, 11th, which makes sense. I was traveling for my birthday just to my parents' house, but I was in the car, I couldn't read. I don't like audiobooks. And then I didn't read anything on the 22nd and the 24th. I was at the dentist's. I was traveling home to go to the dentist. So there's that. And now let's get into reviewing the actual books themselves. So the first book that I finished this month was, well, last month now, it's April now. On March 1st, I finished The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. I really loved this book, and I was surprised because I didn't think I was gonna like it, and I even almost returned it to the library without even reading it because I found out that it was like a mystery, like a fantasy mystery, and I'm just not the hugest mystery fan. I don't read a lot of mystery, but I stuck with it, and I'm so glad I did because I ended up really loving this book, and the characters, I love Anna and Din. It took us 350 out of 410 pages to earn that LGBTQIA rating, but earn it we did. And I was happy with that. And then the mystery itself is also very competent and very engaging. It keeps you hooked without making you feel like, you have no hope of solving it. And the world building is also very great, very interesting. It's like a mix between classical fantasy world building with this ancient empire, but also a Southern Reach-esque biopunk element to it, which I found really fun. I've seen a lot of people also compare it to Pacific Rim because it's about these giant leviathans that periodically attack the empire, and they're fighting them off. So I really loved all of those aspects. The one criticism I do have of this book, and it's not even really a criticism that makes me dislike the book, but it's just something that I'm keeping in mind, something that I just haven't seen that many other people talk about, is the portrayal of empire in this book. Call me a crazy commie, but I just think that if you're going to portray an empire in a fantasy story, there should be at least some discussion of imperialism and deconstruction of empire, and that's just not present in this book at all. And listen, I'm not expecting Anna and Din to start a revolution or anything. They've both been brought up in this empire, and they clearly are bought into it 100%, but I would have liked to see some questioning of the way this empire throws its civilians under the bus to die horrible mass deaths, the crumbling, inefficient bureaucracy that has colonized these lands that they live in, that didn't come from the crazy murderers. It's the Marvel free healthcare villain man problem, where the only people who actually do criticize the empire and want to change the system are crazy murderers, so you can't really agree with them, even though they make valid points about the way the empire is run. Yeah, Anna and Din are very much like, we have to work within the system and we have to fix the empire so that we can all fight off the sea monsters, and I just wasn't the hugest fan of that aspect. I think just because of my views on empire, I don't think there can be a good empire. Like, this empire is less like outright malicious than something like the Masquerade in Seth Dickinson's Masquerade series or in other series where the focus is overthrowing the empire, but there's just not a good empire. So I just wanted a little bit of deconstruction with that concept, and there's just none of that in this book. And again, I don't think that makes the book horrible. I don't think it makes the book problematic or anything. I still really loved this book, and it's the first in a series, so I'm totally willing to wait and see what happens with this one. And I had never read anything else by Robert Jackson Bennett. I know he has another series, I think it's called like Foundry Side or something, that also people really love, and I definitely would love to check that one out now because I found myself really enjoying this book, and I didn't expect to. So. And then on March 2nd, I read Court of Wanderers by Rin Chapeko. This is the sequel to Silver Under Nightfall by Rin Chapeko. I really liked the first book in this duology. It's not the greatest thing I've ever read, but like I said in my last review, my last wrap-up, I came to this book for a bisexual vampire throuple, and that's what I received, so I was happy. And unfortunately, Court of Wanderers just doesn't really know what it wants to be. I really feel like somewhere along the line this was supposed to be a trilogy that got like smushed into a duology, because everything we set up at the end, throughout and at the end of book one, is just kind of thrown away so that we can introduce all these new conflicts and new like storylines and characters, and it just all felt very rushed and very haphazard. Like, we try to have this discussion about colonialism, but none of that was present in the previous book, so it just feels like it's coming out of nowhere, and it's not really explored adequately. Like, the villain is the one who is mad about colonialization, and there's just like nothing really done with it, and the relationship itself, the kind of thing that I really liked about the first book, they're together in this one. They've gotten together, they're very happy together, there's like basically no conflict in their relationship, so there's just kind of no tension or through line with that relationship to latch onto, whereas that was like a really big part of what I and other people liked about book one, the fact that it's like this will they or won't they, like how are they gonna make this crazy throuple work. But in this book it's just like they're in a throuple and it's great, and they're even gonna all get married, so it's like where do we go from here? The kind of only character conflict in this book is whether or not Remy wants to be turned into a vampire so that he can spend like the rest of his life with them. And first of all, I just thought it was crazy that this was even being discussed when Remy's like, what, 20? Like, no bro, you're not ready to turn into a vampire and spend the rest of your life as a 20-year-old with these people you met when you were 20. Like, let's wait a minute, let's hold on. But it also, again, like, nothing is really done with that conflict either. Like, we don't really focus on why Remy specifically would either want to or not want to be turned into a vampire. We just kind of hear these like general discussions for and against it, and then by the end of the book, Remy himself doesn't even know yet. He's still just like, well, we'll get there when we get there. Like, when the time comes, I'll know. And I guess that can be a resolution to this story, but the way it was done in the story didn't feel like a satisfying resolution to that conflict and to like basically the only character conflict, relationship conflict that we have in this book. So yeah, and the big problem I really had with this book was how in book one, Remy's dad is like this horrible, abusive, toxic man who like hates vampires and hates Remy because he reminds him of his mother, who was, you know, this basically war bride who he like kidnapped from a foreign nation and apparently didn't even like, the way it's portrayed, you assume he didn't even treat her well before she ran away with a vampire. And Remy's dad like treats him very badly and like forces him to sleep with women he doesn't want to sleep with, and like sets him up as like to be like basically set up and arrested. He's definitely not the major villain of book one, but he is a villain. He is a villainous figure, and he's horrible to Remy, abusive. And then in this book, he's gotten a personality transplant, and all of a sudden he's not abusive at all, and he's just this guy who's like an asshole with a heart of gold. Like, he just didn't know how to express his feelings correctly to Remy and to his wife, but deep down he really loves both of them, and I just was not buying that at all. And I really didn't like, again, the sudden switch from like portraying this as a very abusive, toxic relationship, which it was, to in the second book being like, actually none of that was a big deal, and like, you know, there's gonna be bad blood between them, but they can work it out. Like, I just didn't like it, and that's again what leads this book to feel like there was supposed to be something in between this, that like maybe there was supposed to be like a conversation or a redemption arc for Remy's dad, and we just never got there because they got squished. But as it was very unsatisfying and very annoying, honestly. I did not like that. I'm just gonna get both of these out of the way at once. I read The Silvered Serpent and the Bronze Beasts by Roshani Chokshi. These are the second and third book in her Gilded Wolves trilogy, which is her YA fantasy trilogy. I think I talked about the first book in my February wrap-up, and I thought that book was good up until like the last 80 pages when it just kind of went off the rails. And sadly, I think that just set the rest of this series up for failure for me because it relies so heavily on the thing that happens at the end of that book and kind of the character developments and status quo changes that happen as a result of that. And I just never believed that thing in the first place, and so it was hard for me to buy into all that like change stemming from that and really feel the impact of that. So I felt like Silver Serpents was the better of the two. Bronze Beast was just an especial letdown because it really just ends up feeling like the series has no underlying themes. Like, what are the themes here? Is the themes that, you know, we should return cultural objects to their rightful owners, but like the characters in this book don't care about that, and they steal cultural artifacts all the time when it suits their own purposes. And the only character who actually does care about like colonialism and the way that the House of Babel has like stolen artifacts from indigenous marginalized cultures and even stolen people from those cultures to raise them up as like the scions of these noble houses. The only character who cares about that is Enrique, and it's always treated as like this like he just cares way too much about that kind of stuff. Like he's an academic and no one else really knows what he's talking about. And then even at the end of the book, instead of joining the group of like Filipino revolutionaries that he wanted to join the whole time, he instead becomes like a curator at the museum. So I just don't love the optics of that. Like the optics of like, oh, instead of joining this revolutionary group, you should work for the institution that has stolen your cultural artifacts. What? I didn't like that. The love triangle between Enrique, Zofia, and Hypnos does resolve into a throuple, which I love thruples, and I kind of called from the beginning, but even that was a bit of a disappointment, and that's sad because I love a good throuple. That's the easiest way to my heart, but I love thruples because I love to see three characters be equally obsessed with each other. I love Remy, Xiaodan, and Zidane from Silver Under Nightfall. They're all obsessed with each other, or the goats of thruples, Art, Tashi, Patrick from Challengers. Like, they are all obsessed with each other. It's a three-way relationship. Everybody has a relationship with everybody else. And Enrique, Zofia, and Hypnos just feel like Hypnos and Zofia casually sharing a boyfriend, and it doesn't even seem like they all really like each other in the first place. Like, it doesn't even seem like Enrique and Zofia have that strong of a romantic relationship in the first place, or like Hypnos and Enrique have that strong of a relationship in the first place. It was just kind of a very tepid throuple, a very passionless throuple, and I didn't like that. I want them to all be obsessed with each other, and it just wasn't that way. And again, speaking of themes, so the theme is not that cultural artifacts or whatever. So is the theme that forged objects like shouldn't exist because people shouldn't play God? Well, spoilers here for the end of the story, but I just feel like the world building was never done in a way that we actually understood how widespread forged objects were and how much of their society was built off of forged objects, because we never learn if only the noble houses in France, if only these noble houses have forged objects, or if they're like very widespread throughout the whole world. We never really learn economically, geographically, military-wise, what the forged objects do, how their society works around them. And so it just doesn't have as big of an impact to me when we end the story and all the forged objects are like destroyed and they don't have to live like a normal life. Because I just didn't feel like I knew enough about the forged objects in the first place. And then like the theme, like, oh, so is it that humanity shouldn't play God? Like, we shouldn't have access to that kind of power? Well, no, because Layla basically becomes a god and has no problem with it. Like, she's still basically a real nice gal who just wants to look after her friends, like, and is doing something. I don't really know what she's doing up there. So yeah, I just felt like this series started off with so much promise, and again really felt like Babel mixed with Six of Crows mixed with National Treasure, and was like a really fun time while also like having a deeper message, and then just kind of petered out and started becoming just National Treasure, which, I mean, all power to you. Maybe if I was, again, more the target audience, maybe if I was younger, if I read this when I was younger, I would have liked this more, but as is, I just wanted a lot more from this series, especially from how good like the first 80% of the first book was, and I did not get it. So there's that. I'm gonna turn the light in the back on. Pay no attention to that. Okay, next, on March 7th, I read Beach Read by Emily Henry. I read, what was it? Book Lovers by Emily Henry last month, and I thought it was fine, but I didn't really love it. And so I read Beach Read this month, which came very highly recommended to me. It's my friend's favorite book of hers, I think. And I'm glad to say I actually did enjoy this one a lot more than Book Lovers. I really liked the like meta-ness of this book, like how it's so deeply about the process of writing and about the process of writing romance versus writing like literary fiction. And I did really like that it wasn't just like the romance writers shitting all over literary fiction, which I'm not even the biggest literary fiction fan, okay? But I don't even read that much romance either, so it was just like, I didn't want it to just be one genre shitting on another genre and like being in the right for that. It was more so that they learned from each other's genres and like genre conventions and each other's writing styles, and I thought that was a great way to do that. And I did like the couple in this book a lot more than the couple from Book Lovers, although I did like their gimmick of both being like the bad guy in a rom-com. But the people in this one do feel more like actual people and well-rounded characters. And I felt like it had just enough like seriousness to it with the whole theme of like her father recently passing away and cheating on her mother, that it kind of balanced out the more sappy rom-com-y elements to me. Again, I feel like there's just a little bit too much plot in this that just goes nowhere, or I guess I can't even really say that it goes nowhere because, okay, the thing I had a problem with was the cult stuff. It was just a really weird thing for him to be researching and a weird thing for him to write a book about, even if he was like a pretentious litfic-y writer. It just didn't feel right or interesting, or like, I don't know. I just didn't like that bit, and I wish it had just been like any other topic, but I guess I can't even necessarily say it like wasn't utilized correctly, because he does end up writing a book about like people who leave and stay in cults, so what do I know? But yeah, I like this one, and I would read more from Emily Henry in the future. I think my problem with romance is just that I don't want to read, I need people to be fighting, I need people to be toxic, I need people to be crying, I need juice, I need tension, I need angst. I'm an angst fiend. But I also don't want to read about like dark romance. I don't want him to be kidnapping her. I don't want him to be tying her up. I don't want him to be assaulting her. I don't want any of that. But I also don't really love romantasy, because I feel like that is so reliant on like gender stereotypes and like bioessentialism, where it's all the male female mate stuff, and I hate that too. So I'm like, where can a girl go to get some like good romance that has tension and angst and juice, that isn't weird and creepy or bioessentialist? Like there's just nowhere I can go. So if anyone has any recommendations, I would love that, but I'm stuck basically where I am. I'll keep trying Emily Henry, I guess. I read The Member of the Wedding by Carson McCullers. I read The Heart is a Lonely Hunter by her and really loved it, so I decided to pick up some more from her. I really liked this one, not as much as I liked The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, which I think is like the kind of common consensus that one's better. This one is it's much shorter. It's about a young girl who her much older brother is getting married, and she basically falls in love with the idea of the wedding and like is obsessed with this idea that they're gonna take her away with her once they get married, because she's this very lonely, weird girl, and she knows there's something weird about herself but just can't put a finger on what it is, and she desperately wants to be a part of something, and she thinks that's something that she can be a part of. And it's all about her and her little cousin John Michael, I think is his name, and their like cook having discussions around the kitchen table basically leading up to this wedding, and then kind of the aftermath of the wedding, where obviously they don't take her, and kind of how she copes with that and how things go. And I found this to be a really like, I can start to see like themes popping up in Carson McCullers' writing, themes of like racism, poverty, sexuality, loneliness, and I found this one to be a really impactful, interesting read, although again, I don't think I loved it quite as much as The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, but I still want to read more Carson McCullers. And then I read People Collide by Isle McElroy. This is kind of a litfic-y sci-fi book about a husband and wife who swap bodies one day mysteriously, and all about how they experience moving through the world as one another, and how basically they decide that they kind of don't want to swap back. They want to live as each other for the rest of their lives. And basically the wife, Elizabeth, ends up leaving the husband, Eli, but kind of he tracks her down, they find each other, they stay together, but staying in each other's bodies. I found this to be really interesting. I think if you're looking for a very like action-packed like sci-fi thriller about body swapping, this is not going to be for you. But as someone who does enjoy a good story about gender fuckery, gender weirdness, I did really enjoy this. I really loved that like they swap bodies and there's none of like the whole, oh my god, I'm so dysphoric, like we gotta swap back immediately, how can I be in a girl's body? They were just totally cool with it. They loved it. They were like, hell yes, let's fuck in each other's bodies. And I found that to be really interesting. I found I think the discussions about gender could go a little farther. This is much more a story about like marriage and relationships and romance than it is about gender. And the gender parts were all the parts that I liked the most. But I still did enjoy the commentary about marriage and romance and like, again, the way that men and women move through the world and are viewed by society. The one criticism I do have of this book is that it's good it's short, because by the end of it, the extremely pretentious litfic writing style and dialogue style started to massively grate on me, especially in the last little bit, which is told from the perspective of Elizabeth's mother. It's really interesting to see from her perspective, because you can see like her criticizing Eli, not knowing it's actually her daughter Elizabeth, and how she's like, you know, my baby would never act like he's treating her, when in reality, you know, it is Elizabeth acting like that. So I loved having that POV, but I didn't love her voice. Like, she was, again, this very pretentious, like, litfic stereotype almost, and I believe that, like, people like that exist, but everyone in this book talked like that, and it started, again, to really grate on me by the end, so I'm glad that it's so short. But I did really like this, and the cover is beautiful, so I'm probably gonna keep it. And then I reread The Witness for the Dead and The Grief of Stones in preparation for The Tomb of Dragons, which came out on my birthday on March 11th. The Witness for the Dead is basically a spin-off to The Goblin Emperor, which is, I think, a much more popular and well-loved book. People don't really read the spin-offs, but I'm, again, the only person in the world who actually likes them a little bit better than The Goblin Emperor. I love these books. They follow the, like, gay priest who can speak to dead bodies, Thara Selahar, and him basically solving mysteries in the city of Amalo. And they're very, I've seen people call them cozy. Sure, I guess. I mean, I don't know if it can be cozy if you're dealing with murders and like sexual assaults and stuff, but it is very much a series that is less action-based and action-focused and more focused on characters and world building, like how Selahar moves through the world and how he is dealing with the trauma of like getting his lover executed, basically. And it's a really great series. I really love Catherine Addison's world building. I think it is done so well and so subtly, like it's so naturally integrated, which I really love about the story. I love Selahar as a character. I think he's like the wettest, saddest boy, and I love him so much. And I really like the mysteries. I feel like she can kind of sometimes juggle a bit too many mysteries at once, but it all kind of works out in the end. And I also was surprised at how many like minor threads in book 1 were like woven into book 2 and 3. So I was impressed at that. I think this would make a great TV show. I think it would make a good like mystery of the week type show that still has like a larger overarching narrative. So get on that. But yeah, I really loved both Witness for the Dead and Grief of Stones, and I was really, really excited for Tomb of Dragons, especially because I was like, there's this extremely slow burn, subtle romance happening in the background between Selahar and the opera house owner, Iana Pelthenhior. And so I was like, they're finally gonna kiss in this book, or they're finally gonna like make a declaration of romance for each other, and I'm gonna be so happy. So that did not happen in Tomb of Dragons. I was really conflicted about this book. Overall, I think I still really liked it. All the stuff that I loved about the first 2 books is there. The world building that is so fantastic, the wonderful character work, the interesting mysteries, the plots that are surprisingly well integrated with each other. We get dragons in this book, which is so great. But 2 things. I don't feel like this was a natural place to end this trilogy. It is marketed as the last book in this series, in the trilogy of Cemeteries of Amalo. I don't feel like this was a natural place to end it. I know she's probably gonna come back to this world because it does end on like a very to be continued note, but I still feel like if there's a bunch of like unanswered questions and unfinished feeling character arcs in a trilogy, then the author has not done a good job of writing a trilogy. You shouldn't have to go pick up another trilogy to finish the plot points done in this one, and you can have stuff that bridges over, but this isn't like a TV show where you expect that not all the questions are going to be answered in one season. Like, trilogies are self-contained units of books. That's just the way I view it. And so it didn't feel like a natural place to end this trilogy, and it really felt like a lot of things were rushing at the end so that we could wrap everything up in time and get to the next place, leave Amalo basically. I didn't feel like it was the right time for him to leave Amalo. It still felt like he had a lot of stuff to do there, and I could have been okay with this if it felt like it was kind of this like bittersweet ending for Selahar, that like he was sad about it and he was like, one day I'll go back, whatever, but he's just kind of he's weirdly very happy to be leaving and is just like excited to go on this adventure with his new hot bodyguard. And that was kind of sad to me, that he just like writes these letters and is like, well, I'm leaving because I'm being chased by these guys, don't worry about me, and can you get my furniture if it hasn't already been destroyed? You don't want to like say goodbye or anything. You don't want to express any regret. Okay, sure. So there was that. I didn't feel like this was a natural place to end this trilogy. And how was I queer baited with a gay character? Okay. Here's the thing. There's the ship war of all ship wars going on IO3 right now with this book and this series, and there are wars happening in the Storygraph reviews, and I'm just gonna get my two cents. You cannot convince me that Iana and Thara were not supposed to be romantically interested in each other in the previous two books. I read them right before I read this. They were romantically interested in each other. They were being set up as being in a romance. Come on, you can't trick me. They were interested in each other. I'm not just being crazy. It's not like I'm just shipping two random characters in the background who have never spoken to each other in their lives and who are both canonically straight and like have girlfriends. Like, this is not a Destiel John Locke situation. Thara is canonically gay and he was showing a lot of interest in Pelthenhor. Iana, Pelthenhor, is an opera house owner and he was giving major gay vibes and he seemed very interested in Selahar in a way that you cannot brush up at just being like, oh, I'm really passionate with my friends. I don't believe you. I don't believe you one bit. I think she kind of had to retcon that relationship and kind of drop it because Iana is obviously very attached to Amalo. He has to stay there. He runs an opera there. And she wanted, for whatever reason, Selahar to leave the city at the end of this book. So like they can't end the series in a relationship. And I don't know, I feel like that was just a really weird way to get around that issue. Like have them date and have it not work out long distance and have them break up, because it just feels like I'm being, and I hate to use this word, gaslit about the fact that these characters were interested in each other, okay? I'm not crazy. They were interested in each other, and all of a sudden in this book, it's Selahar saying, you know, Iana, I'm not actually attracted to you. I think we should just be friends. And Iana saying, that's great, because I've been straight this whole time. Iana, since when? Since when have you been straight? I don't believe you. And again, I can't believe it. I was queer baited with a gay character. A character comes out as straight in this book. Anyways, I'm getting heated and I shouldn't, because again, I do really like this book and I love this series and I love this author and I will read more series by her. I will read whatever gay adventures of Selahar she puts out, but I just don't want to go through this experience again. I'm pretty sure there was a pretty big gap. Yeah, it's The Witness for the Dead was published in 2021. Grief of Stones book 2 was published in 2022, and then this was published in 2025. So there was a big gap between the second and third book, and I think that was probably because she was trying to figure out how to get these two characters either together or not together, or how she could naturally get Selahar away from Amalo, and I'm just not sure she 100% succeeded at that. I'm just glad that this book is finally out and that she can finally take this series in a direction, I guess, that she really wants to, and hopefully that means there won't be as big a gap between books, and hopefully, you know, she has plotted out all three books or whatever series she wants to write next so that it doesn't feel like this in the future. I just don't want this to happen again. That's my thing. Like, I've seen a lot of people being like, I don't want to bother reading another trilogy from her because it feels like this last book in the series feels pointless. It feels like it came out of nowhere. Like all the stuff we set up in the first two books was kind of dropped in the third. And I understand where people are coming from with that. I'm gonna give her another chance because again, I still do really just love her ideas and her concepts and her writing style and the characters in here. But I also agree that like I don't want to go through this experience again of picking up on all these hints in books 1 and 2 and like thinking I know what way up, like how an arc is being set up, and then to have it like hastily scribbled out at the end and being told like, oh no, you're wrong, that was never gonna happen in the first place. Like, I'm sorry, I have eyes and I have a brain and I can read what is on the text in front of me. So again, weird, frustrating experience, but I still do really love the series and I will read whatever she puts out. So then I read Blood Over Brighthaven by Emma Wong. Again, this was a very popular book. It has a very high average rating on Storygraph, which is rare. We tend to be harsher on there than Goodreads. And it has like 20,000 reviews on Storygraph, which is again very rare. There's less people on there. So I had really high expectations for this one, and maybe that's where it went wrong for me. I didn't really love this book. I think again I probably would have thought it was fine if I didn't have such high expectations for it, or if it had been marketed as YA, because it's marketed as adult fantasy and as this like tragic story, but to me it felt very surface level and very juvenile, and I say that again in like the nicest way possible. Like it just felt like it was for a little bit of a younger audience. Okay, hi. So I'm editing this video and I don't think I did a very good job at explaining why exactly I didn't like Blood Over Brighthaven and my specific problems with it, and I was kind of very flippant and almost dismissive about it, and that just bugged me. So I wanted to go back and actually get into what my problems with it were and talk a little bit more about it. So basically I had like 4 main problems with Blood Over Brighthaven. Did I call it Blood Over Kaigen? My bad, guys. Blood Over Brighthaven. I had like 4 main problems with it. One of them was high expectations, one of them was personal preference, one of it was mismarketing, and the 4th is my valid criticisms of the writing, in my opinion. So first of all, I had very high expectations, and I don't know if they could have ever been met, you know, they were very high, so it kind of had an uphill battle there. And then also, some of it is personal preference. I'm not a huge dark academia fan. This book is very dark academia. I'm not a huge STEM fan. I'm more of a humanities person, and this book is very STEM focused. So some of the things I disliked about this story were probably great and wonderful to people who do like dark academia and STEM. But while it's an uphill battle for me to like dark academia and STEM books, it is possible. Like, I loved Babel, I love The Secret History, and even other stuff. Like, I said, I think earlier in this video, that I normally hate mysteries, but I loved The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. So it's possible. I'm usually really good at differentiating and making a distinction between I don't like this and this is bad. So I'm capable of doing that. And it wasn't just, oh, this wasn't what I wanted it to be. So I think that was part of it, definitely, but not my entire thing. And also the mismarketing. This is marketed as like a tragic, dark adult fantasy. I think this is older YA. It just didn't feel adult to me. It felt a little bit younger, and just the way it was written and the way the writing style was very it's dark academia, but it's very chatty almost. Like, it's like Sayona talking to or at the audience like they're her diary rather than an actual like writing style. And I prefer and is seemingly like the only woman in the city who isn't happy with sexism. Like, there are mentioned female scholars who tried and failed to become mages, and then at the beginning of the story there's either a mention of a woman running for like government or a man running who wants to give women voting rights. I don't remember which one it is, but there's one of those things. And I found it really odd that like the women's suffrage movement was introduced into the story and then never brought back up beyond that one bit at the beginning. So I found that kind of weird. But if Sayona's isolation from other women is just supposed to be her gaining worth from succeeding in this male-dominated environment and thus being purposefully separated from or alienated from other women, either by herself or by like her mentor, I would have been more okay with like the lack of female friendship and like the lack of awareness of feminism and like women's political movements. But she lives with and seems to be very close with her female cousin and aunt, and never realizes that they have their own wants, needs, and struggles as women, that women are like a class of oppression rather than just like, you know, a gender, which they are, but again, they're also like a class of oppression. So weird that a book that is so heavily about axes of oppression and stuff like that, like even the main character can't internalize that. But anyways, even when she begins to like unlearn her racism and her ingrained beliefs about magic and religion, she still doesn't realize that like Quen women face a different kind of oppression than she does until way too late in the book. Like, I get that Sayona is meant to be at the start of the book a very unlikable character and like egotistical and selfish and like a white feminist, but she's supposed to kind of grow over the course of the book into like this real feminist and revolutionary almost, who like is the catalyst for social change at the end. But for me, I didn't feel like she grew enough, and the ways in which she did grow felt very inconsistent. It felt like the hardest thing for white feminists usually to overcome their racism immediately went away when she realized her racist religion was built on a lie, whereas the thing that, you know, white feminists usually are good at, recognizing other women, like the oppression of women, Sayona could not do until like the very end of the story. So it just felt inconsistent to me. And then at the end of the story, Sayona has this like epiphany that systems of oppression are interwoven and that oppression is material instead of being emotional or logical. She basically invents intersectional feminism and Marxism. And like the building blocks for this realization are there throughout the story. Like, she opens the story struggling with knowing that society wants her to just be a wife and a mother. Then she realizes racism is bad. Then she realizes that her society benefits from and relies on Quen's suffering. And then she realizes Quen women are oppressed in a different way than she is, but that doesn't mean that it's not oppression. But each of those individual realizations feel pretty hollow to me and feel like they come out of order. Like, it feels like she should, you know, begin the story knowing that she's oppressed, and then realize that race and class are other axes of oppression, and then realize that, and then like put the pieces together and invent intersectional feminism, I guess. Like, the building blocks are there, but they're jumbled up out of order. Speaking of her racism, I did find it kind of distasteful that in a book published in 2024, we're still using this trope of the racist white female main character being taught not to be racist anymore by her non-white love interest. And to me, it was even more disappointing that Sayona never really addressed her racist beliefs or made like a conscious effort to learn and grow from them. She just no longer believed in her racist religion, which magically erased her racism and her belief in like stereotypes and stuff, which just isn't really how that works. And then when I went and looked up stuff about this book, I saw that there's like official character art, where Tomo is white and ginger, and I'm not saying that all indigenous people have to be, have to look a certain way, and that there can't be people who are white who are like oppressed and like colonized, like the Irish say hello, but that doesn't change like the kind of core complaint that he is from a marginalized ethnic group in this city and she is from the majority ethnic group in this city, and he helps her to not be racist anymore, basically. And he's not the sole thing that causes her to change her mind, but he's a big part of it, so I just didn't love that. And I also just really disliked that Wong slides in this misogynistic trope of the female lead nearly being sexually assaulted and needing to be saved by her male love interest. That's just like a major squick for me, and I hate that trope. And I feel like that, again, is like not something that we do anymore. It's something that people have been, brought through the ringer for a million times. But yeah, and then I also think that Wong tries to sidestep Sayona being like a white savior by having the final spell be finalized and cast by Tomil, but Sayona was the one who taught him that magic in the first place and was the catalyst for the riots that led to them being able to cast the spell and like flee the city and start their own lives again. So I do really wish that her and Tomil felt more like equals, and that he was more involved with the Gwen community and like rallying them to fight back, like maybe was part of like a revolutionary group or something, because as is, he mostly just wants to like keep his head down and raise his niece, which is fine, but he's like the only Gwen character we really spent much time with in the book, so it just made it feel like they didn't have their own like political groups or like groups that were fighting for justice, which is not how, again, not just not how any of those things work. And I also thought his niece was going to be a way bigger character, considering the prologue and like how important she seemed there and how important he seemed there. But she mostly just exists to be like a Spitfire kid that Sayona has to team up with sometimes. But I did like that the book ended with Sayona deciding to like burn it all down instead of like running for governor. So there's that. I do want to give the book that. And to get a little bit meta with it, I did find a blog post by Wong where she talks about the process of writing and publishing this book. It was a self-published book before it got picked up by a traditional publisher, and it was also supposed to be a novella, just like The Sword of Kaigen, which was a self-published book that was originally supposed to be a novella and then got expanded out and published by a traditional publishing agency. And she talked about how with The Sword of Kaigen, she finished the first draft with the arc she had planned and then just found herself kind of dissatisfied with the conclusions that she came to, and expanded the book from there. And I have seen some people critique the pacing of that book because the climax happens like right in the middle, and then the rest of the book is spent dealing with the fallout from that climax, and it's pretty slow and character driven, not plot driven. Whereas with Blood Over Brighthaven, instead of the structure being the issue that made it need to be expanded out into a novel, it was the pacing and choosing the wrong setting for the narrative she wanted to tell. She says it began as like this bare bones breakneck concept that didn't really match the mood and tone that a dark academia inspired setting leads readers to expect. And in this post, she says, "In choosing a Western-inspired dark academia setting, I thought I was being clever because I might be able to save time communicating ideas, aesthetics, and concepts already familiar to the average reader of English-language books." And that was so illuminating, because that was exactly my problem with the world building of Blood Over Brighthaven, that instead of feeling like a truly different, fantastical world with problems and oppression that was an allegory for our own, but that was like its own thing that felt natural within the history of the universe, it just felt like our world and our problems with a thin coat of fantasy aesthetics slapped on top. And then also in this blog post, she discusses how Blood Over Brighthaven was mostly a writing experiment, playing around with these concepts that she didn't normally write about or gravitate towards. And she says that Sayona was meant to be like kind of a physically weak protagonist, because in her other work, she mostly features physically formidable women or a protagonist who is very action heavy, an action hero protagonist. And that was another one of my big complaints, that Sayona was nearly sexually assaulted by a male scholar and Tomo comes in to save her at the last second. And so this quote kind of made me realize that Wong was not intending to fall into like this misogynistic damsel in distress trope. She was trying to subvert her own body of work, in which women are often their own protectors and are physically strong. But for me, someone who hasn't read any of her other work, I just didn't catch that subversion experimentation, and so it just felt like this like tired old trope. I think you can keep her being like a physically incompetent woman, because that in and of itself was not my problem, but I still just think that she should not have the attempted assault scene, or if she absolutely did have to have that, as a plot point. I wish that Sayona would have been able to get away on her own. I think at this point she has already given Tomil her like magic taser, but why? Like, why can't she just get away from this on her own? Just rearrange things there. And so I think that like no beta readers like caught this as like an eyebrow raising moment because they probably were Wong's dedicated fans who had read her other work and thus had other examples of Wong writing physically, mentally strong, independent characters, female characters who they could compare and contrast Sayona with, whereas I only had Sayona, and so it came off as very bad to me. Also in this blog post, Wong admits that she doesn't even like dark academia because her own experience with academia was mostly like a phase and she feels no great passion for the university setting, which ironically is the exact same way I feel about academia and dark academia, which is why I don't force myself to read or write in the subgenre. So I'm kind of confused about why she continued to write this book in a dark academia setting when she didn't care about the setting, and even says in the blog post that she wishes she had chosen like literally any other setting for the book. And I'll admit to not really knowing how self-publishing works, but I assume that means she doesn't have hard deadlines as to when she needs to release this book by, so she could have completely gutted it and started over and reworked the setting so that it actually worked as the novella she intended it to be. But she does mention in this blog post that she had like deadlines by pre-order dates set in stone, so maybe she had like already committed to retailers that the book would be out by a certain date, so she couldn't simply like spend a lot of time reworking the book and rebuilding it from the ground up. Like, a new setting is not a simple Control F fix. It would take a lot of work. Either way, I'm guessing that she really wanted to capitalize on the like unexpected success of Sword of Kaigen and release something new while she was still riding that wave, and releasing something that checks off a lot of boxes for people, like dark academia, anti-colonialism, magic system, enemies to lovers, romance. Like, that's an easy way to stay relevant in the eyes of like the fantasy reading public. And she kind of confirmed that train of thought in the blog post when she says that Girl Squad, her like fun YA magical portal fantasy, was a lot more fun for her to write but didn't sell well, whereas Blood Over Brighthaven was a quote-unquote pretty miserable writing experience, but the pre-order sales are already everything an author could ask for. And says that in the future she'll be more careful about selecting story concepts that have the potential to sell well but also aren't miserable for her to write. And I'm again not trying to come off as like hating on her for this. Like, I do think it's really smart to try to ride that wave while you're still relevant. Like, how many fantasy authors have we seen just like be extremely popular and then fall off because they can't release anything else after they release the book they were really popular for? Hello, Patrick Rothfuss. So I definitely don't think she's evil for like wanting to just go ahead and publish something so that she would still be relevant in the public. And I do think that like finding story concepts that you think will be popular and that people will want to read, but also, you know, writing what you want to read and not being miserable while you're writing is a really tough line to walk. And so I definitely wish her the best with that, and have no, like, I don't think Emma Wong is a horrible writer or a horrible person at all, which is why I wanted to come and refilm this bit and just like get out all of my thoughts in an articulate manner instead of just being kind of like flip and dismissive about it. And I feel like I was portraying the book as like worse than it actually was, and I didn't want to do that. So I feel like my writing complaints are valid, but again, a lot of this stuff is personal preference, and so many people love this book, so if you do love it, I'm very glad for you. And that's it. I've been yapping for so long. Okay, bye. Okay, and then I read Filthy Animals by Brandon Taylor. This was a book that I randomly picked up at a used bookstore because it was a nice hardback, which is a rarity at a used bookstore. And I had never heard of this author before, and I ended up getting obsessed with him. And not even because I thought this was extremely good. Like, it's so close. It's so close. This is a short story collection, but some of those short stories are like connected and intertwined. And for me, it was like they were just intertwined enough and just connected enough and had just enough development that I started to really get into it and want to see where we were going. And then it felt like the collection just like abruptly ended. And so I really enjoyed Brandon Taylor's writing style, which to me is like literary and like meaningful, but without tipping over into purple and pretentious, which is a very fine line to walk, and not everyone's line is in the same place, so your move there. But I really enjoyed it, and I really liked his characters. I really love how he builds character and how he, you know, his characters, I love his characters. But again, it was like, it really just felt like the book just like decided to end suddenly without any actual development happening. And so I was like, well, maybe that's just because it's a short story collection. So we'll talk more about his other novels later, and we'll talk about that. And then next we'll just do these all. I reread All for the Game by Nora Sakovic because The Golden Raven came out, but I still can't buy it. So I reread the original series, To Quell That Urge, and every time I reread this series, I expect it to be bad this time, and every time it's still good. I don't know if it's just because I read it when I was younger, so I have this like really fond nostalgic attachment to it, but like unironically, I do think this is a great story about the power of friendship and like this made-up sport and trauma and overcoming trauma and like respecting your partner's boundaries and everything like that. Like, I just really do love this book and this series, and so much so that I can overlook stuff like the extremely dated portrayal of some things, the extremely inaccurate portrayal of other things, the way it has not aged well in places, and the writing style, which for me is mostly fine, but then the one thing that really bugs me is that she doesn't use contractions sometimes. I don't know why, that just really bugs me. It always bugs me in works. Like, I criticize Holly Black for this as well, so Nora Sakovic is not, you know, I can criticize everyone, even people I really love. But yeah, these characters have such a grip on me. I'm a fox for life. We're all foxes. Okay, then I read Real Life by Brandon Taylor. This is his debut novel, published in 2020, I think, and this is a story about a grad student in like a scientist. I don't remember what he is. He's a science grad student, and basically is about him kind of striking up a romance with a lab mate, fellow friend, and it's kind of all about his alienation at this extremely white college, as he is a black gay man, and I think it takes place in like Iowa or something. So it's all about kind of his alienation within his friend group, like these people who are his friends and who are friendly to him and who do like him, but he always feels like he's kind of on the outskirts. Like Filthy Animals, this is about sexuality and like violence and your upbringing and academia, and it's all about the main character trying to decide whether or not he wants to stay in academia and like make something of himself but be miserable the whole time, or leave academia and try to live real life, but quite possibly, you know, fail and never become anything, or even get swept away by how hard it is to live real life. I kind of had the same problems I had with Filthy Animals with this one, because even though it's not a short story collection, it still just feels like it cuts off at an arbitrary point. The book ends at like this arbitrary point where it feels like we haven't even begun a character arc or character development for the main character. Like, he ends the story totally undecided what he's gonna do, if he's gonna stay in academia or leave, and I would be okay with that. Again, I would be okay with like kind of ending that is supposed to feel unsatisfactory, or an ending where he's still not really sure what he's gonna do, if it didn't feel like there was such a little character development actually done instead. Like, again, it just feels very abrupt. It feels like we cut off without there being a natural stopping point. And if it was supposed to be, again, this very unsatisfying ending, it's just this kind of portrait of this man who like suffers and can't figure out what to do, and then the story ends, I mean, that would be one thing, but it kind of ends on a weirdly nostalgic and hopeful note, which didn't entirely work for me. So again, I still like this. This was so close for me. I will just keep coming back to Brandon Taylor, because even though I feel like he can't develop characters and can't complete a character arc, the characters themselves are so juicy and so interesting that I can't resist. Then I read Conclave by Robert Harris. I loved the movie, so I wanted to read the book. When I found out there was a book, it was a book first, and I enjoyed this more than I thought I was gonna enjoy it. It seemed like very dad fiction, but I enjoyed it. I mean, I like the movie, so it's basically the same plot. The rumors are true. Lawrence Lomelli in this book is canonically a volcel bisexual. He is canonically interested in men and women, but has never acted on any urges, which I thought was funny. And then the rumors are also true that Benitez is described like the female lead in a romance novel. He's so tiny, he could blow away in the wind. He's got these big wet eyes. He's tripping over his robes. I almost called it a dress, because that's what it's treated like. But so that was funny. But what really surprised me was that the monologue Benitez gives at the end of the book, where it's basically like locked in that he's going to be chosen as the next pope, is completely different in the book than it is in the movie. They wrote a new one for the movie, and I actually really liked the movie one a lot more. The book kind of plays around with the themes that the movie is like all in on, with doubt and learning to accept uncertainty and live between certainties and accept that the Catholic Church has to grow and change. But it kind of veers back at the end, walks it back, and it's just mainly about this vague sense of unity and like the need for the church to be unified and together. Like, Benitez goes up to his political opponents at the end and like shakes their hand and, you know, makes it certain that they will be allowed in his church and like have a place in his church, because we need a unity. And I just don't care about that. That feels centrist as hell to me, and I don't love that. But the movie is so much more about doubt and uncertainty, and I really loved that aspect of the movie, so it was fine. Then I read Lost Ark Dreaming by Suyi Davies Okungbawa. This is a novella about this kind of skyscraper set in this like dystopian future where, you know, climate change, the sea has covered most of the earth, and the rich people live at the very top of the tower and the poor people live below sea level in this like dark, crushing prison basically, and some people live in the middle. And it's about people from like 3 levels of society who kind of are forced to work together to stop this like unknown threat that has come into the tower. Or is it a threat, or is it actually helpful? And that's what the story is about. I found this novella to be, I mean, it's a novella, it's a quick, easy read. I found the world building to be really interesting, and I liked like the mixed media aspects. There's like interspersed poetry and like newspaper articles and interview transcripts and stuff like that, so I liked those aspects, and I really liked the characters and the character journeys, except for one. It felt like Ngozi was like just not believable as a character. His arc was very poorly done. Not poorly done, that seems kind of mean. Ngozi was just like a character that didn't entirely feel believable. He goes from feeling so strongly one way to feeling so strongly another without it really feeling like there was a catalyst for that like character change. That I honestly felt like his character could have just been cut from the story entirely, and it could have just been about the other 2 main characters. But yeah, and I also felt like the latter half of this novella is just way too plot heavy. It becomes like almost this like action thriller at the end, where they're like outrunning the police and like taking the elevators up to the right floor, and that was just fine. I didn't really care about the plot, and I felt that the kind of more the first half of the novel, which is a lot more character focused and just introducing us to these characters and how they live their lives on the tower, was a lot more interesting. So I wish this had been more of a character study and not bothered with like the action, like we gotta get the thing to the thing type of plot, which is just boring to me, but maybe that's just me. So I then read Sandwich by Catherine Newman. This is a story about a menopausal neurotic mother who is spending a week on vacation sandwiched in between her elderly parents and her newly adult children, and kind of the tensions that come up between everyone during the trip. And this is again a very short read. I enjoyed this. I think not many people are, because the main character is a very particular type of woman and can be very annoying at times. She is, again, a middle-aged white lady who can be very neurotic and be very mean to her kids and her husband, but in like a mom way, like not in a genuinely mean way. And she's going through menopause, so I'll give her some slack there. But this is also a story that is deeply about like reproductive health and women's health in general, and how it is not taken as seriously as men's health. And I enjoy those aspects of it. The one thing about the story is that, spoilers, a big part of it is secrets and family secrets, and the secret that comes out during this trip is that the mother, I can't remember her name, Rocky, her name's Rachel, but they call her Rocky, which is a little too quirky for me, but the secret comes out that she basically had a secret abortion when she and the husband had first gotten married, and she told him it was a miscarriage. She didn't tell him she had gotten an abortion, and she basically regrets it. She wishes she hasn't done it and feels a lot like of guilt and shame over not only doing it but not telling her husband. And that is like kind of an interesting perspective, I think, around abortion, because it's not one we see often. Usually we either see people who are like 100% anti, would never get an abortion in their lives, hates all other women who get one, versus people who are like, it's your body, your choice, do whatever you want. I have absolutely no regret over my abortion. I feel zero shame and guilt. I don't think we often see this portrait of a woman who's very conflicted over it and who like thinks it's okay for other women to do, but like kind of regrets her own choice. And so that was like an interesting conflict, like internal conflict to bring up. But then I felt like the author just really did not want to come across as seeming anti-abortion. So every time we start to talk about this conflict, the main character and any other character she's talking to both have to be like, you know, give 1,000 disclaimers, be like, we totally support abortion, and like we love abortion, and we like fought for abortion rights and stuff like that. And so it just felt like the author was very unconfident in the fact that this is a story in which characters can have complex emotions, and not necessarily be like the mouthpiece for the author. Like, I don't think even without those disclaimers the story would have come across as like anti-abortion. Like, it's clear that this was just a personal conflict and feeling from Rocky. So I don't know, I felt like that was just unnecessary. And also, characters several times say TBH in this book, like in dialogue, out loud. They say the acronym TBH, not to be honest, and that was weird. Like, one time I could have brushed off, especially if it was coming from like a younger quirky character, like one of the younger people, but multiple people say it, and I was just like, what? Are they saying the acronym TBH out loud? Why? So that was weird. Moving on. I read Swords Point by Ellen Kushner, which I don't know how I found this. I think it was like a recommendation on Reddit somewhere. loved this. Oh my gosh. So I can't say definitively that Sword Across by Freya Marsk was inspired directly by this book, but like it had to have been, right? Because they both are stories set in an extremely low fantasy world, dealing with where sword duels are the norm, are a cultural staple, where there's a queer normative setting where it's just kind of characters are bisexual or gay and it's just casually remarked upon, it's not a big deal, where kind of a big part of the story revolves around one person hiding their secret identity from another person, and sword fighting is a big part of it. Like, it had to have been an inspiration. But while I didn't hate Sword Cross by Freya Marsk, I didn't really love it either, and I think that this book did a lot of the same stuff that that book was doing, but in a way that I liked more. Like, I really loved the gray morality of the characters in this book, the way that they were such complex characters, the way that they never really told the audience directly what they were thinking or feeling or going to do. Like, you had to piece that information together yourself. They were very emotionally closed off, which I like in a narrator, in a character, in a viewpoint character. And then I also like that sword fights were like bloody and violent and often to the death in this book. Like, the author really wanted to deal with violence, and especially what being a bystander to violence would do to someone, and that was very interesting, I thought. And then I loved the romance between Richard and Alec. It's not really a romance in the traditional sense because they're just in a relationship before the story begins, and we kind of see them together as the story progresses, but I really loved them together, and I thought they like absolutely matched each other's freak, and I was very into it. And I was so surprised to go in the reviews and see people being like, you know, the relationship was so awful, they were so toxic to each other. I did not think so. I thought that they matched each other's pretty perfectly, and I thought they really suited each other. The only thing about this book is that it does end pretty abruptly. I would have liked even like 50 more pages. It also feels like there's this one character who's like, feels like they should come back and like do something, but then they never do. You'll know if you've read it. But overall, I really, really loved this book, and I just loved everything about it. It was so fun to me. I didn't even want to give it back to the library because I liked it so much. And I definitely plan to buy a copy. I've got the sequel on hold. It's coming to me, it'll take a while, but I really, really highly recommend Swords Point by Ellen Kushner, especially if, like me, you liked Sword Crossed by Freya Marsk, but weren't crazy about it, and you kind of want something similar to that, but a little bit darker and a little bit edgier, so definitely recommend. Then I read The Late Americans by Brandon Taylor. This is his most recent work, and it is almost a mix between real life and Filthy Animals because it's not really a short story collection, but it's told from multiple POV characters. And again, they all kind of have arcs and all kind of are developed, but also we kind of flit around and they all have their own kind of separate thing going on. And I felt like this one had a better follow-through rate. It felt like a lot of the characters from the first half of the novel did actually get like character arcs and endings to their arcs and feel like they had developed and grown as characters, but we still kind of had the same problem with the characters introduced in like the latter half of the novel, especially because we get like 70% of the way into this novel and we're still introducing new characters and new viewpoint characters. Like, the last POV of this novel is a brand new character that we've never even like heard of before, so I don't know if that's like the best way to do a story like this. And you know, the author's allowed to do whatever he wants, but it just didn't work out for me. But again, I did feel like this had a much better follow-through rate than his other two books, and like I said, I love his prose, I love his characters. They keep me coming back for more. I also really liked the kind of theme of this book about creative writing and trauma. Like, one of the main characters, one of the POV characters in this book, is like mad at all his fellow poetry students because he's like, all they want to do is write about their trauma. I'm not going to write about my trauma. I'm going to write about something totally fictional and totally different and not related to me at all. And then he finishes the poem and reads it back and he's like, oh my god, this is about my trauma. That same exact thing has happened to me in a creative writing class, so I found that to be charming and very funny. But yeah, I would read more from Brandon Taylor. Again, I just feel like he needs more follow-through, and we almost got there with this one. We almost got there, so we take those. I read Gifts by Ursula K. Le Guin. This is the first book in her Annals of the Western Shore trilogy. This is a YA series that she wrote in like the early 2000s, and I don't think it was as popular as Earthsea or anything else she wrote. It mostly flew under the radar. Like, I'm a big Le Guin fan, and I've read a lot of her books, and I didn't even know the series existed until very recently. So there's that. And I think this never became as popular as Earthsea because it's a much shorter series, and it's also much less action focused, magic focused. It's set in this world where there's like the lowlands and the highlands, and the lowlands are like this normal like medieval society, and the highlands is this like nomadic tribal lifestyle, but some people have like special gifts or powers in the families of clans, and it follows two children basically of these clans who have powers that they kind of refuse to use, and how that impacts their lives, and how just because you have the power to do something doesn't mean you necessarily need to use it or should use it. And I found that commentary to be very interesting, and just as always, Le Guin's world building is so excellent, her character building is so excellent, her prose is so excellent. There were lines in this that I just like was like, yes, I'm home. I love her writing style so much. And I do plan to finish reading this series. And so I really did enjoy it. It's again not one of my favorites of hers, but pretty good. Then I read Sisters of the Revolution, a feminist speculative fiction anthology edited by Anne and Jeff Vandermeer. This was one that literally just like a patron at the library checked in, and I saw it and snatched it before it could go back to its home library because I wanted to read it. I'm a big fan of Jeff Vandermeer, and I didn't know that he and his wife like edited anthology collections. I know his wife is like an editor, but I didn't know this existed, and so I was very interested in reading it. And this one was good. This was a good anthology. It was very stacked, full of like well-known, beloved fantasy authors, which I loved. I recognized a lot of names in here, even if I hadn't read the individual stories themselves. Like there were new stories to me from Octavia Butler and Angela Carter and Eleanor Arneson, authors who I love a lot and who I had heard of before, Joanna Russ, Tanith Lee, people like that. So it was like a star-studded list, and most of the stories in here I really did love, and there were a couple that were real standouts to me, like And Salome Danced by Kelly Erskridge, and And Salome Danced by Kelly Erskridge, The Grammarian's Five Daughters by Eleanor Arneson, When It Changed by Joanna Russ, and I also really liked The Woman Who Thought She Was a Planet by Vandana Singh, and what else? The Screwfly Solution by James Tiptree Jr. and The Glass Bottle Trick by Nala Hopkinson. And I also really liked The Palm Tree Bandit by Nnedi Okorafor. There we go. So yeah, I enjoyed a lot of the short stories in this collection, and even the ones that I didn't love, I usually thought were at least thought-provoking. Even the ones that I straight up didn't like, at least I thought were thought-provoking, minus a couple where part of what I didn't like about them was the fact that they just didn't seem to be about anything. But overall, I did really like this anthology, and I want to learn more about this Jeff Vandermeer and Anne Vandermeer as like an editing duo. I would love to read more anthologies edited by them. I did feel like the middle was kind of stronger than the first three and last three stories, and I also think I preferred the stories from the first half to the latter half, but overall I did really like that. So we have finally come to the end of what I read in March. 23 books, you guys. We did it, and my leg's falling asleep, and I want to go play Marvel Rivals or Overwatch, so we'll just leave it there. Basically, have you read anything that I read last month, and do you have any opinions? I know my Blood Over Brighthaven take is a hot one, and don't worry, I've already argued with people on Reddit about it, so you don't need to do it. I'm not gonna change my mind. But I would love to know if you loved or hated any of these books I read, if maybe you want to pick up one of them now, if you have any recommendations for what to read in the future, although I might not take it because I've decided that I'm gonna do both the SFF Female Gaze Summer Reading Challenge, as well as attempt maybe to do the r/fantasy bingo, fantasy bingo. So I gotta get started on that. I gotta get reading. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!